All right, we are here today to talk about assessing community impact and telling our story. We have a number of folks here from our Loyola community that are going to talk about their work and then how it is creating impact on the ground for our neighborhoods and community-based organizations. So my name is Erin O'Keefe. I'm the director of our Center for Community Service and Justice. And when I came to Loyola, I had the opportunity to start our York Road initiative, which was purely focused on community impact on the ground. Today, in merging both our community service and volunteerism nature from our students and much of the engaged scholarship and community engaged learning involving faculty, where is that intersection between community results and student and faculty results? So we'll start with some introductions.
I'm Mary Jo Coro. I'm an assistant professor in the psychology department. I've been at Loyola for 12 years.
My name is Alan Brzee. I'm an associate professor in the writing department, and I've been here since 2010.
And my name is Leah Saul. I'm an assistant professor in the education department, and I've been here for 4 years.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We just watched a video from our friends at GEDCO's CARES. Both Rachel and Deanne talked a little bit about how Loyola as a whole, not our multiple departments or offices or individual students or faculty, but Loyola as a whole impacts their programs and their ability to create impact on the ground for their residents and clients. And so I wanted to delve in a little bit on both Mary Jo and Alan's partnership with GEDCO and how that both creates results for our students and our faculty as well as folks on the ground at GEDCO. Can I start with you, Mary Jo?
Sure. So I've been volunteering at CARES for about 2 years now, first in the food pantry, and now I work in the energy assistance program, and that was just something that I did for my own personal development. And I think that was helpful because I was already involved in CARES and knew Rachel and Deanne and just sort of organically had started talking to them about what some of the needs were in terms of mental health because I'm a psychologist, and so those conversations were coming up naturally for us. And I had already just informally helped them identify some places that they could refer some of their clients if they had mental health needs that were in the community that were affordable, and had already kind of been working with them on that. And so we developed this idea to screen all of the clients who come into CARES for a certain period of time. It was about 6 weeks, and to ask every client if they had mental health needs that they would like help with, and then to refer those people that said yes to that to a volunteer case manager to see if we could connect them to services. And so I was able to get a Kolvenbach grant last summer to fund that project, to work with Rachel and Deanne and the social worker whose name is Gay on that project. And so I think in terms of the impact on the community, we've already started helping people by getting a lot of the clients at CARES hooked up with mental health services, but also health insurance, health providers, and other community services that already exist in the area. But we're hoping to continue that impact by maybe creating a permanent position at CARES for a case manager who can address those needs on an ongoing basis. So that's kind of our hope for the future. Right now there aren't any students involved in the project, but that's something I'd definitely be open to exploring in the future.
Great. And so as you heard from the previous video, we have a number of students involved in CARES in different ways. And
Right.
So I think one of the questions for us to keep in our mind is how do we connect our students with Mary Jo's work and certainly her scholarship so that those links are very clear. So Alan, do you want to tell us a little bit about your project?
Sure. I started at Loyola in 2010, and then in the spring of 2011, I was fortunate enough to begin working with a small neighborhood near campus called Richner Springs, and we started doing some direct service learning with them. And then over the next couple of years, my professional writing students started helping them develop their community website. And then that project slowly developed into my work with GEDCO CARES. Some of my service learning students from professional writing classes, after they had worked on cover letter and resume prep, started doing direct service at GEDCO, helping their clients find jobs, apply for jobs online, and then write cover letters and resumes and prep for their job interviews. So that evolved into the Engaged Scholarship project that I started working on, where my students and I developed literacy resources that we used in the summer of 2014 for community workshops. And that's where the GEDCO CARES clients actually came in and worked with us for 3 weeks to develop skills using Microsoft Word, using the internet, writing cover letters and resumes, And that went pretty well. As far as student impact was concerned, I had professional writing students getting experience in their document design and writing, but also in developing these literacy resources. And then as far as impact with the GEDCO Cares clients, from the summer of 2014 workshop, 7 of 14 attendees got and kept jobs at the 1, 3, and 6 month mark. And GEDCO helped us collect that data. So things went pretty well with those workshops. And so we decided to do them again in the summer of 2017.
Great. So as we heard from Alan, his really started with students rather than with the research focus first, and that definitely has evolved in different ways. And
Yeah.
I think one of the things we'll get back to is use of data, collecting data, and certainly measuring impact both for our students, certainly through our scholarship, but then also, in partnership with GEDCO. So I want to switch a little bit over to Leah, and if you could share some of your work, I think with South Baltimore Learning Center as well as Maryland New Directions. Great.
Awesome. So in 2015, I received a Colvin Bach to work with Maryland New Directions. And I was privileged to work with a director who was very interested in both data collection and assessment. But what I found when we started really chatting was that their perceptions of community impact and how that's measured were very tied to their funding mechanisms, and particularly how those things are counted inside of grants. And while that's important, and it's certainly data that we wanted to collect, and those were things like number of hours inside of the program, persistence and retention. Maryland New Directions, similar to some of the GEDCO work, is a program for the long-term unemployed in Baltimore City. And so that's defined as individuals who've been out of work for over 7 months. And our long-term unemployment rate here in the city is about double what the unemployment rate is. So we hover at around 8%, which is very high. And what we know about long-term unemployed is that they face additional challenges to seeking employment. So in working with Maryland New Directions, certainly we wanted to help them to collect the data that they needed, but I also wanted to have a kind of deeper conversation about what that data meant for their clients and for the community. In some of our conversations, we realized that the students, the participants inside of the program, while they were able to acquire jobs, they didn't necessarily keep those jobs at 6 months out and 12 months out. And that had some big implications for the curriculum, honestly. Really thinking through with community partners, not only what data we need to collect to talk about community impact, but also maybe some alternative metrics that we can think of to really identify what's happening inside of the programs, and are our participants able to take what they know and apply it authentically in the community.
Great, thanks. So when we're thinking about sort of starting down the path of how do we create community impact, right? How do we meet our students' needs, our research needs, but also at the same time positively impact community organizations? What are some of the first questions you all have asked yourselves to really have that conversation with a partner?
One of the things that was really on my mind was just making sure that any work that I did with CARES would be sustainable. I didn't want to just come in and do a short-term project that would be interesting to me as a faculty member but not really help them as a community service agency. And so I wanted to really spend time talking to them about whether the work that we started would be able to be continued after I wasn't available anymore, because once the academic year started, I was kind of busy with my teaching again and not as available to CARES. So whether they would be able to sustain it, and sort of what would they need to be able to sustain it and to stick with them through that process. So I'm right now trying to work with them to see if we can get funding for them to have long-term case management services, things like that. And then also another thing that we have on our minds is that we want to share this project with the broader Baltimore community. So we're thinking of some ways like the Neighborhood Institute, where we could present these findings to similar community service agencies who, without a lot of funding, could do the same thing.
I think for me and my students, we're guided by the Loyola Listening Project that was just wrapping up in 2010 when I got here, to work off of real community needs. So responding to the digital literacy issues, the digital divide, as well as the employment issues, And with Richner Springs, they were looking for some place for their children to play that would be safer, which is why we started with the adopted lot.
It wasn't necessarily your student learning outcomes that you were thinking about first. It was really taking a look at what were some of the opportunities to engage on the ground.
Yeah, and also how the missions and the goals of the nonprofit organizations and the community needs, as well as the learning outcomes, would overlap. And it also helped us go through the project and really see if our work was impacting and helping to follow a design model called iterative design. And that's where you work in a participatory way with your community partner to develop early stages based on their needs, things like research questions and research methods, and then collecting the data and using that data to revise the process as well as any deliverables that are coming out.
I love that concept, and certainly the process of iterative design, because it's so natural to working with community organizations who may lose grant funding, or who might have a staff change, or who might have different needs because of an issue going on the ground. What were some of the tensions that you experienced when you were first starting out in this work?
My project was an assessment project. The question that the community partner had for me was, how can we better understand some of our concerns with persistence and retention? And for me, the start was, what are you already doing? And how can we take what you have to answer the questions that you have? So first, taking a look with them at the data that they were already keeping, instead of saying immediately, yay, I'm a researcher, let's go collect some data. They have multiple forms of data and different conceptualizations of data, which was an amazing opportunity for us to sit down together and say, well, this is why you maybe started keeping this data, but how can we use a different lens to look at it? And that was just collaboration. That didn't even require additional time on our part, other than some time to sit and think.
So let's talk about that a little bit, the concept of both drowning in data
And not having
and not having enough. And I'll rephrase it like, how are you working with your partner to tell their story so that they're able to build capacity for their work? By that I mean, oftentimes they'll have rich data, or they'll have existing partnerships, but maybe it's not as collaborative as it needs to be, or maybe their story is not being told in a way that can attract a new staff member through a grant, or can increase capacity in different ways.
Well, one of the things that was helpful to us is that CARES already has a really well-organized database, and Rachel Neal is really skilled at managing their data. And so she has the ability to add questions and pull data from their system really skillfully. And so that was already in place. But related to that, a challenge is that most of the data are actually put into their database by volunteers. And it's a different volunteer, every day. Some volunteers come in once a week, some volunteers come in once a month, not usually more than that. And so we needed to develop a system where the volunteers who were already familiar with CARES and already committed to the program would not experience a big disruption in the way they were used to doing things. It had to be really easy for the volunteer to say, yes, I screened this person, here are the questions, this is what they said, and then go about the rest of their work. And so we needed to develop a way to get all these different volunteers to be comfortable using this perfectly appropriate database to give us the data that we would need. So Rachel and I are going to present our data to the GEDCO board and talk to them about the possibility of sustaining this work by seeking funding for a permanent case manager position who could potentially be half-time at CARES and shared and half-time with one of the other programs that GEDCO oversees. So that's kind of the next step for us. We haven't done it yet.
I think after the success of the 2017 workshops, Becky and I were talking about pursuing a larger grant that would give us some support as far as research assistance and also being able to run the workshops during the semester instead of just the summer. And then, of course, the next step, I think at this point we've collected enough data on the literacy resources to see if GEDCO CARES wants to post them on their website so that other organizations could use them throughout the city. They're tailored for folks in Baltimore City.
That in itself is an outcome, right? To be able to share that information, that's really significant. That's awesome.
I would be very interested in looking at them myself.
Sure, let's do that.
Yeah, collaborate with M&D.
Exactly.
I think for the work that I've done with M&D, certainly they've used the outcomes that we found as part of their grant reports and seeking additional funding. But some additional work that I've done with South Baltimore Learning Center, I've had students in a service learning course volunteer their time, and I also volunteer teach at South Baltimore Learning Center. And increasingly, we are being seen as a resource for training and development for their own staff and core volunteers. And so I'm going to be working with their grant writer to incorporate some additional opportunities for both our students at Loyola and the volunteers and teachers at SBLC to learn together. And so we're really excited about that opportunity.
That's really exciting. So as you think about the future, and you all have great ideas, and I can sort of see the wheels turning around, what's next in your partnership? Where are the places of tension that you find right now in being able to balance your students, certainly your own research needs, and creating impact on the ground? How can you name those tensions for me?
There's no tension.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Everything's wonderful.
going really well.
I can name, I think, a micro level one and a macro level one. So for me, a very small micro level tension is finding the time to analyze all these data that we collected over the summer now that my semester has started. And so that's sort of on me to finish this collaboration with CARE so that we can have the data to take to the next step and to present to people. So just a finding the time tension is always present in academic life. At the larger level, something I was thinking about when Lee was mentioning unemployment rates is the uncertainty in the country about the availability of health insurance, including mental health insurance. And so as we're embarking on this process to help people get connected with Affordable Care Act insurance and resources that are in Baltimore City now, we don't know how long those resources will remain available and how much access people will have to health care. And so that is really hard. That's a difficult environment to navigate, and it creates a lot of uncertainty for us and our clients. So
Funny that you mentioned time. So during our interviews with students in some of my service learning classes and the interviews with our community partners, that was actually a finding that we discovered, was the extra time and the extra effort that it takes to do these sorts of things. So we heard from our community partners that would really love to do more, but I'm working a full-time job and I'm raising a child, and of course the students are stressed because they want to give back, they feel called to do this, but they're juggling a full-time student schedule. And then as the faculty member, coding and analyzing data takes a lot of time and effort. Empirical research is great, but very quickly, coding and analyzing the interview data as well as the quantitative data can be a bit laborious. So maybe some funding for some folks to code and analyze that data would be great. So it's the time. It really is. It's just the time.
Tensions, right? So time, just to go ahead and third that. Definitely, there's not enough time. And as much as you try to align your teaching and your research and your service, and that's something that's personally very important to me as a literacy professor who is very engaged in community literacy as my research area. Time is invaluable, and regardless of how much you try to align all three components of this job, there's just never enough. But I would say for me, one of my biggest tensions is in what counts. So again, I was just speaking to kind of how my research and teaching and service are all pretty aligned, and yet when we speak to community partners, having them understand that there's a tension for me, that we want to help them to tell their story in the way that they deem most productive, and yet in terms of time that may not count for anything for me.
Right.
And so how can we make those collaborative products of scholarship, whether they're something for a grant or something for an academic journal, how can we balance the needs of the faculty member, the students who have a grade, and then the community partner who has very different outcomes and needs.
I will say that Loyola, you know, compared to other institutions I've been at, has been very supportive of my efforts, but also in accepting that type of work as scholarship and counting toward, you know, the tenure and promotion and the annual review benchmarks that we have to meet. So, you know, I think that's part of the mission integration. So I've appreciated that.
Absolutely.
I would just second that by saying this is not my first institution, and I sought out Loyola and applied here specifically because of the CCSJ and the clinic and some other things that I knew we already had some systems in place to really support this kind of work. And again, there's still tensions, but it certainly helps when there's some institutional structures that help it become more feasible.
Tensions are always going to be there for
Right.
sure.
Exactly.
All right, so I guess my final question, and this would really be a reflection, we heard from Rachel and Dan at CARES. What were the things that you took away from that were surprising?
I just am always struck by the number of people in the community that CARES is able to serve, knowing that they rely mostly on volunteers and have very few paid staff, and just that their reach is just so tremendous, and their enthusiasm to continue to grow more programs and add more services in a really limited budget environment is just always so inspiring to me. So it's just a lot of what draws me to CARES is just that connection to them and their passion. The two of them are just so inspiring, and I really love being a part of their team and seeing all the things that they're doing and their vision for the community.
Yeah, I'll second that. My students come back and write in their reflections. I have them do structured reflections, and they're amazed at Rachel and Deanne's energy and activism, and I'm excited to get into the project with them to see how, you know, in a collaborative way, we can kind of take it to the next level and make even a broader impact in a lot of different ways.
And I guess from my work with my own community partners, both SBLC and MND, one of the things that was the most, I guess, surprising, but maybe inspiring is probably a better word, was how many of the former students and participants work there, and or current program administrators and people who are really helping to facilitate the overall mission of the organization, and to understand at that level of care and the level of authenticity that then is possible was just truly inspiring, and a privilege for me to be able to work with them.
And I'd say for me, seeing them describe how Loyola makes an impact in their operations, in their clients' lives, in the way that the organizational culture exists, I think I need to do a better job of telling all of your stories around that impact, because I think sharing that information on our campus will engage more people in creative ways on how they can work better with our nonprofit partners like GetGo.